Welcome to the Global Sales Mentor Podcast for conversations that drive growth. When you are ready to grow your international sales, join the conversation with your host, Zach Selch.
Welcome to Conversations that Drive International Sales. I have Kyle Sloat here, who is in the field of foreign exchange. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you leverage foreign currency to drive your international sales. And so, Kyle, maybe you can just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do, and then we'll jump right into the interesting questions and all the interesting stories about foreign currency.
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Zach. It's great to be on. So I head up our business development team here at MoneyCorp. So, essentially what we do is we judge people who have international sales, international operations, right? And engage with them, see what kind of solutions we can provide to, the challenges that they're facing around foreign currency. So, in terms of MoneyCorp, we're a leading global FX and payment specialist that, specializes in payments and managing risk associated with that foreign currency itself. So it can definitely be pretty interesting in terms of, what's going on in the markets and what's going on with people's businesses. And I always love hearing from people like you who have a ton of international business experience and just, seeing what kind of challenges you guys might have faced in the past. And if, at the rate things are developing on the, global payments and foreign currency front, what solutions we might be able to offer now that maybe weren't available at the time.
Yeah, great. So let me tell you my favorite foreign currency story.
Okay.
I'm in a university town and I have a lot of friends who are professors, and several of them are econ professors and business professors. Northwestern has a really good MBA program. So I have a lot of friends who are in that field. And a while back, this goes back about 15 years, I was at a party and I'm talking to somebody and I said, "What do you do?" And he says, "Well, I'm a international business professor. I'm a professor of international business at Northwestern." And I said, "That's interesting. What exactly do you teach? Because I'm in international business and I sort of wonder what they teach in class." So he starts talking a little bit, and they have 13-week courses. And it sounds like 90% of what he's teaching is currency fluctuation and hedging against currency fluctuation. So I sort of chuckled. I said, "I'll tell you what, I spend about 30 minutes a month dealing with currency issues. There's so many other things that I deal with." I said, "I understand how important it is, but it's like your whole course is based on this. And I've never lost a sale because of currency fluctuation." This is what I said. This was about 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, skip forward to, I want to say 2014. And I don't know if you remember, but the Brazilian real dropped about 60% in a matter of possibly days, no more than about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So I had a distributor, a partner, who got a purchase order for about a $1.5 million deal. And about 3 days later, the real dropped. So he's holding a purchase order, but he can't give me that order because now the difference in currency has changed so much that he simply can't afford to give me that order. Yep. On the other hand, he's accepted the order from the customer, right? So this poor guy is totally screwed. And he's like, "Well, Zach, can you take some of this damage yourself?" And I'm like, I don't know how I can handle that, right? So we're going back. How
good of friends are y'all?
Sorry?
I say, how good of friends are you guys? Maybe
that's exactly it. It's like, how good a friend am I? So we go back and forth with the customer and the I was the manufacturer and the distributor, and we're going back and forth trying to find a solution. And it took months to figure out how we were going to solve this problem and get goods out. So, you can go years without having, it's like any type of insurance, right? You go years without having a disaster, but when that disaster hits, you probably want to be in control, have some way of hedging that damage. So that's my personal experience with this, right? I've never had anything quite so bad, but since then I've had, you can see the past 7 or 8 years, there have been major currency fluctuations. The Australian
Yep.
dollar, the euro, I think the real's the biggest one, but boy, you get some, and they impact sales, right?
Certainly. And I would say Real is one of the trickiest currencies to work with in general. They have so many restrictions on the central bank.
Right.
But with that said, that's kind of where we see one of our biggest growth opportunities right now.
Exactly.
That's because we purchased a bank in Brazil.
Right. Where there's risk, that's where you come in, right?
Exactly.
And you're like working with somebody who does any type of insurance. I mean, I know it's different from insurance, but essentially that's what it is. We are, people like me are paying you a piece to take the risk away, right? Is that fair to say?
I would say it's reasonably fair to say. And, there are kind of a few different approaches, right? When people are looking at these currencies and putting together a strategy, right? It's, I don't want any risk, take me all the way out,
Right.
Not interested, no thank you, right? You have the people who are, trying to squeeze out every little, few pips in their favor, right?
Right.
And really maximize that. And then you have people in between, but kind of the way that I always look at it is protecting risk, yes, but more importantly, kind of protecting margins, right? And thinking about it in that perspective, I think you can go a lot farther. And exactly like the situation where you mentioned, huge fluctuations can totally wipe out a deal.
Right.
Or, especially with people in some of these other countries like Brazil, Colombia, parts of Asia, parts of Africa, even if, the currency is doing well, sometimes it's difficult for them to get their hands on, the US dollars, right?
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you what, I don't know if you've heard stories like this, but I've gotten paid for goods in Argentina by a wine company.
Yeah.
And what was going on was I was shipping goods to my partner in Argentina, who was a medical company, a distribution company.
Mhm.
And he was making a deal with a friend of his or somebody he knew who exported wine. So he was essentially, I was shipping him goods. He was selling those goods, buying wine, exporting the wine. Somebody was selling the wine for dollars.
Mhm.
And then I would get paid by, somebody who had sold Argentinian wine in the US because he had dollars. And I can only imagine how difficult it was for this poor guy to manage this whole way of paying me, what I needed to get paid, right? So, it's a wild world out there sometimes, right?
Well, not only is it difficult just figuring that out, it's also difficult figuring out, okay, how much am I even going to make on this deal when all is said and done?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So it can be wild. I've, the latest one recently has been Venezuela, and I've heard some horror stories there. People, trying to do transactions by literally shipping gold or using cryptocurrency or barrels of oil, all kinds of I guess currency is a commodity. So
yeah, exactly. You try and figure it out. Yeah, I haven't done business with Venezuela in
probably
5 or 6 years, and there are a couple of countries I don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole right now. But I guess look, they need to buy stuff, right? So my not being able to solve that problem is probably costing me some revenue, right? So there you go.
Yeah, and just another interesting one recently was somebody in the plane manufacturing industry, not Boeing or anything like that, but somebody who's doing more mid-sized models,
right.
And they're working with airlines based out of Nigeria, which as far as Africa goes, it's pretty good, but their banks, they don't have liquidity to provide them millions and millions of US dollars.
Yeah.
We ended up working, or we're in the process of working on a deal around South African rands, right, which is the dominant currency there. So it's definitely, at least my approach is always like, let's put our kind of heads together, see what kind
and
of
be a little creative. Yeah. Exactly. So why don't you tell me some stories you've heard about some challenges, how different small manufacturers or mid-sized manufacturers, because we're not all Boeing, we're not all IBM, they have people on board. They can hire their own economists to figure this out. But if you're a mid-sized manufacturer, what are some of the challenges and some of the answers that you're seeing people facing?
Yeah. So, as people are doing more and more, sales overseas, right? Not only can just finding a way to be able to, receive that revenue, right, be difficult within itself, right? Do I need to open up local accounts, right? I would say just taking it a step further, most people don't have a good idea of how foreign currency is actually priced, right? So they'll call their bank, they'll get a rate of the day, they'll say, sounds good enough, and we'll kind of go from there. And a lot of these deals, you're leaving 3 to 5% on the table just to the exchange, which is.
And I'll tell you what, you work so hard, to negotiate up your margins, and then you're leaving money on the table because you're being a little sloppy with one of the logistical aspects, right?
Exactly. And the kind of way that I like to sometimes think about it is like if you hire a new head of sales, right? And he increases your global sales by, 2-3%. It's a pretty good outcome. That's
You're
decent.
pretty happy, right? Yeah.
Why would you leave that same amount on the table? So, kind of one of the big benefits with us and with some other providers is that, we can offer receivable capabilities. So you don't need to open those costly accounts with your bank, right? You can just receive the funds directly into a segregated account of your own in whatever currency, exchange your currencies between, and kind of manage your currency from that perspective. And, kind of the traditional model in terms of price for the more price savvy people is let me get as many banks as I can, call them up individually, right? Say, what rate are you going to give me? Oh, well, my guy at Wells Fargo says he'll give me this rate. Oh, here says he'll give me this rate, right? And kind of playing that game. We automatically do that with 20 banks, all electronically. So in terms of price, we're really able to kind of beat anyone. So those are kind of the two main problems, right? Just not understanding what's on the table, and then just having the logistics to be even able to work with the foreign currency.
Right.
So once you get there, right, then let's say, how do I protect myself from this risk? And there's a few different strategies, right? Some of the larger manufacturers that are having, larger orders, right, machines, whatever it might be, right? Maybe it makes sense to do a forward hedge on, individual purchase order and just say.
I've done that. When you're dealing with a purchase order of $250,000 or so, makes sense,
Exactly. So you don't, you have a desired margin, and a lot of these companies can have pretty tight margins, right? And you can easily have your entire margin wiped out. So just locking it in ahead of time, which is all the forward is really doing, can definitely be beneficial. But I would say forwards are kind of, probably still in the States, the main way people do it, right? And I would say the States is a little bit behind in terms of foreign currency and how they deal with it. But what more and more people are starting to do are using, option and derivative products, which, still give you the same protection benefit, but allow you to, take advantage of those swings in your favor. So you're not missing out and being, overhedged, right? So, there's the per purchase order approach. There's a full-on comprehensive portfolio approach. The I have the market view that the dollar is going to keep getting stronger approach. I have the market view that the dollar is going to get weaker approach. And our job is to tell you your market view. Our job is to give you the info to help you figure it out, and then put together a policy around that market view.
Right. No, that's great, and that's very helpful. So I have this argument or discussion with a lot of people.
Okay.
I typically try to avoid putting out price lists in other currencies. Now, what do I mean by that? Sometimes I'll do price lists in euros and dollars. I really don't like doing a lot more than that, because then I'm taking the risk on myself. But I know, I've been with companies, I've joined a company and they have a price list in 12 currencies, right? And then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I'd like to phase this out over the next year and not do it next year and simplify. but I know people do it and it can be very effective for them. So why don't we talk about the pros and cons of that? Do you want to put out a price list in multiple currencies and what are the benefits of that and what are the dangers of that?
Yeah, definitely. So a few things. I mean, I'll say just straight up, there are some jurisdictions where it's just not going to make sense to really offer a price in that currency, just because it's going to be too difficult to collect, too costly for you. And some countries just, have incentives around, working with dollars, right? Whether it's tax incentives or whatever it might be. So it's not always going to be the case that, I'm not allowed to say you're always going to want to send it out in currency. But, what I would say is if we maybe think a little bit about the converse, right? Somebody who is sending you, an invoice in dollars, right? What are they doing with that invoice? They're building in a cost of their exchange, so some additional money for themselves, which is usually pretty significant because they're not getting good rates from their bank.
Yep.
And then what else are they doing? They're building in a little bit more margin because what happens during this?
They're taking safety on top of safety on top of safety. Usually.
Exactly. And then plus just a little extra for the hassle. Right. So, I think offering a price in the local currency, right? It's fair to build in that extra margin and makes it more attractive, for your buyers overseas, right? Significantly, and it can solve some of these issues where difficulty getting your hands on the currency, whatever it might be. And then, if you have a good partner and, at least somebody who's going to be honest with you about, hey, how they're pricing your currency and what kind of margin that they're making, right? You can, definitely come out with a situation where your overall margin is increasing. So I don't know. I honestly haven't given this a lot of thought, and I'm guessing you have more. But let's say I'm $100 million exporter, and I'm exporting to 25 countries right now. Yep. But you know how it is. It's probably 60 to 70% is going to be to 3 countries, right? And then the rest are all small countries. Would you say this is the line you should draw, this percentage of your overall sales or this much money? If I wanted to offer, because let's say the euro is an easy call, right? You're dealing with 27 countries. It's typically the big, depending on what your product is like, your biggest currency after dollars is probably going to be euros, right? Depending on it. So the question is, okay, how do you decide which currencies are you're going to offer a price in that currency and which currencies you're going to say, hey, suck it up and pay me in dollars, right? Yeah. So that's a good question. I would say, anything like euro, Canadian, pound, right? Super safe. We call them the fiat currencies.
So you're not even thinking, sorry to interrupt you, but the way you're looking at it, you're not even thinking about percentage of sales. You're saying this is just a no-brainer because it's not going to change that much, right?
I would say maybe by country is where it makes the most sense. But I guess if it's a percentage of overall sales, right? I would say maybe do the math yourself, right? Think about an additional few percentage on your overall volumes of sale. And that's what I always encourage people to say, is this worth it to me, right? Is an extra, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 grand on these sales, does that move the needle for me? And
that makes perfect sense, because I think you're taking a look at it and you're saying, okay, is this going to get me another 50, is it going to get me another 50 or 80K worth of sales? And if the cost is only going to be $1,000 for, the hedging, then it's worth it for me, right? So I think that's where I think you're right. I was just looking to see if anybody had ever talked to you in terms of that, about how to make that decision.
That's an interesting approach, certainly. And I would say our kind of first approach is always, let's have a conversation, but then let's figure out what numbers we can put on it. And then is this worth it to you? And another thing I would say is with, the more flexible hedges, right? The option and derivative products, not only it's no longer just about protecting your margins, right? You'll still do that. but you can also create some positive variance, right? That wouldn't have been there before if you were just working with US dollars.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And then, like you said, in the end of the day, it either pays for itself or it doesn't pay for itself, right? So if you're taking a look at it and go, I'm going to make a little bit more money, and that little bit more money can add up, like you said, maybe the cost of another salesperson, right? Or a trade show, like that little bit of money you're saving by working with somebody like you and hedging on that currency fluctuation. That could be another trade show. That could be another regional sales manager's salary, right? So,
and it could
it's an interesting way to look at it.
It could just mean, just straight up significantly, more sales for a specific country. I would say the worst rate I've ever seen was somebody's distributor in Pakistan, which is granted a pretty difficult currency. They were paying close to 30%.
Yeah.
To exchange US dollars, which is by far the most astronomical, terrible margin I've ever seen.
Right.
I would say 5 is still a pretty bad margin, right? Maybe depending on the country, right, you'll get a little bit higher than that. But once they were able to fix that, it was just a huge boost because that distributor was having to build that in for their cost structure. So. Exactly,
and that's basically purely wasted money. Right. Yeah. When somebody is building in safety margin because they're insecure, that's wasted money. Right. Yeah. That's it. So what else can I do to protect myself as a manufacturer when I'm doing business internationally from a currency perspective?
I would say just, obviously hedging is the biggest one, but I would say just considering, okay, what's going on with this currency? What's going on with this country? Is this, a safe currency to be, operating with? Are there restriction liquidities? Are there significant consideration to be made on, the political situation? But, I would say, obviously, we'll help talk you through whatever country you might be working with and whatever currency you might be working with. And it might be a case like with the Naira where, hey, let's think about using South African Rand instead.
Right.
Or it might just be the case of, it's pretty risky. There's not a big risk of them doing non-payment, right? You have a good relationship with them. Why don't we just put a hedge on the back of this? So even if the currency tanks, right, they're still paying you the same amount of currency. You're still getting the same margin. So
great. And of course, it's always cool to hear funny stories. So can you tell me any funny stories about how people have totally screwed this up?
Well,
and you don't have to name names, of course.
They're always funny after the fact, not so funny at the time.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, if we're thinking recently, right, with the Swiss franc being unpegged. I had a friend who worked at a previous country where he had a client that had a bunch of sales revenue, sitting in a Swiss account that basically, I think it tripled.
Yeah.
But there was so much fluctuation and so much, activity in the market, he couldn't even get it out.
Right.
And ultimately, he ended up taking a big loss. So he wasn't happy at the time, but, he saw him and thousands of other people saw millions of dollars sitting there becoming broken right now. So there's definitely been things like that, and we've seen people get and that's the other thing and about hedging, right, is if you're doing just a simple forward like we talked about, if you're not doing an option, you can easily miss out on those moves in your favor. So we've seen some people who opted to do that and, left $100,000 on the table. And it's always frustrating, but, it's life lessons, live and learn, and we'll help, put together the policy that's going to be right for you and try to, keep you informed on what's going on with the markets, right? Nobody has a crystal ball. If we did, we wouldn't be talking to you. We'd just be trading the market all day.
Right.
But yeah, so.
And that's the thing. I think when you take a look at it that way and you talk about what you could earn, if by taking control of this element of the risk, you can make 2% more margin, 3% more margin over the course of a year. That's significant money. If you're selling, so that's 30K on $1 million, right? If you're looking at 3%. So if you're selling 10 million bucks, right? That's 300K right there. That's not bad, just in terms of a little bit of money to do a little bit more work, because the work involved isn't that much, right? That's a couple of hours. I mean, from the manufacturer's perspective, I'm thinking that's a couple of hours a month to call somebody like you, talk it through, do the get an assistant to do the paperwork. That's pretty good return on investment if you can do that. So that's not a bad way of dealing with it.
Yeah, and I'll say the one thing about our approach, which is maybe a little bit different, is we came over from the UK. We're processing about 70 billion in total FX transactions. So we have a fairly substantial global infrastructure.
Right.
And our approach, is essentially we'll make it available to you. There's not going to be any cost. There's going to be any obligation, right?
Right.
And if you take advantage of it, it's because you're getting a good rate and it's more beneficial for you. And then we'll make our money when you execute through us. So from that perspective, it's definitely a win-win. And, the other thing I'll say is as people grow internationally, you get more and more payments going out internationally as well in foreign currency. And there's definitely a benefit to requesting, invoices in the local currency from them as well. Right. You think about the margin they're building in is not going to be there. And you think about, hey, if we see the 90-day terms on my invoice, we see a 5% move, maybe it's still better for me to pay $1 and I'll just pay $1.
Right.
Those considerations are definitely something, that we can kind of help businesses talk through. And I think it's always an interesting conversation, at the very least.
Can't argue with that, Kyle. Cool. All right. Well, thanks a lot. Anything you want to say to plug your company and what you do before we part ways today?
Yeah, definitely. We can include my contact information in this.
I'll do that. Yep.
Yeah, and then if anybody has a particular question about a specific country or currency, whether it's something that you've already started doing business in or just considering it, happy to take the call. Spend a few minutes seeing if there's a solution here for you and take it from there.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for your time, Kyle. And again, this is Conversations That Drive International Sales. We talk about different ways to help you as an exporter grow your international sales. So thanks for joining us.
Oh, one last thing. We do have a partnership with the Ex-Im Bank. So if you're a member of the
Ex-Im Bank,
we'd love to talk.
So Ex-Im Bank's going to be a whole nother subject. And I love the Ex-Im Bank because, again, when you're dealing with risk, you gotta, this is also a whole different area of risk, but people will come back and they'll say, ooh, this looks a little risky. I don't want to do business. And a lot of companies walk away from deals, especially, and I'll tell you what, my personal experience is you'll be dealing with a government and the government will say, look, I can't pay you up front. It's like, we just don't have the methodology to do it, right? But it's the government of Colombia. In the end of the day, you're going to get paid, right? So you go to Ex-Im Bank, you give them 3 points or 2 points and change, and you're going to get this deal. And I've done multi-million-dollar deals that way with government. I think I've only used the Ex-Im Bank for governments, but you could use them for other people. But again, these are, people, they come and they say, hey, I can't pay you up front, right? I'm not going to give you cash in advance. Deal with it. And Ex-Im Bank is a great way to do that, because very often if you're a smaller or mid-sized company, right, your board is going to say, hey, I'm not going to ship $4 million to Saudi Arabia or Colombia without getting paid for it. And, on the other side, the Ministry of Health or the government is saying, well, we don't pay in advance. I can't, I'm buying a whole bunch of stuff this year. I'm not going to pay one vendor in advance, suck it up. And Ex-Im Bank is the right choice, right? So there you go. I didn't realize you guys were also partners with Ex-Im Bank. So there you go. Learn something new every day.
And if you want, we can, have the person that set up that partnership, join the next the XM podcast. But one last note: if you're not dealing with the government, right, but it's somebody else, and you are using the XM bank, it can definitely be attractive to let them know we have a hedge in place. We'll accept local currency. You're not, part of the reason they're worried about paying is they don't know where their currency is going to be at versus the dollar. So giving them that assurance can help as well.
And I'll tell you what, some of these big deals, the companies just have trouble getting together enough money or even getting together. I've had distributors I've worked with put a mortgage on their house to give me an LC, right? And I felt bad about it, but sometimes that's where you end up. And working with XM Bank, sometimes you can save that problem, the biggest, I'll tell you what, the biggest problem, and this, you might have heard this before, the biggest problem I find with being in my shoes, right? You're the VP of international sales of a company that, does a few $100 million, and you go to the board or you go to the CFO and you say, I want to work with XM Bank, or I want to hedge my risks because I want to make sure that we're going to get paid. And he's like, whoa, Zach, what do you mean you're not sure you're going to get paid? And I'm like, well, I know I'm going to get paid, but I'm more confident if I get a partner involved. And he's like, well, you shouldn't be dealing with customers if you don't think you're going to get paid. And, so once you raise the word risk with your CFO, very often in American manufacturers, they're like, well, I want zero risk. If you have a question about that customer, then don't do business with them, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, there are customers, you're going to have a risk. Yeah. You have to find a way to hedge the risk. You can't just walk away from deals because there's an element of risk involved, right? And that's where you guys come in. So, yeah.
And what I will, additionally say that, we find with these CFOs is if you get an extra, $100,000 in foreign currency fluctuations in your favor on your balance sheet, right? You might get a pat on the back.
Not a bad thing, right?
Yeah, but conversely, if you get the same amount as a loss, that's how people lose their jobs. So having these conversations about risk is definitely
that is exactly right, Kyle. Well, again, thanks a lot for coming on board with us. I appreciate it. And again, this is Zach Selch, Conversations that Drive International Sales. Join us every week for more information about how to drive your international sales.
Great talking with you, Zach.
Thanks a lot, Kyle.